I'm a professor of international affairs at the New School in New York. The New School is a very special university because it was created as a result of intellectuals 100 years ago who felt the need for a new place to discuss ideas outside of conventional universities, because conventional universities were too restricted in terms of what you could discuss because of the environment of political and social oppression in the early 20th century in the United States. There was a threat of communists and things of that kind, and certain ideas were discouraged. And these academics from Columbia University wanted a new place, a new school to discuss. They also felt that the conventional education was not adequately connected with the challenges of the world and society. And they also wanted a place where students could learn without the formal structures of learning and education. So that's how they created a new school. But like with many things, this rather innovative thinking turned into the same normal university structure. So it's a university that is particularly committed to social justice, to progressive social thought, and to engagement with current social challenges of the day. And this suits me very well because I am doing research, but doing work on issues that are of contemporary social and political and economic interest. And I have been, before I joined the New School, I was at Harvard for 2 years as a research fellow. But before all of that, I spent 30 years in development cooperation with the World Bank and with UNDP. But a lot of that time was spent in doing policy research, and I was head of the Human Development Report from 1995 to 2004. So I directed 10 human development reports before that. And as you can see, in terms of my background, I can say a lot more, but currently I am also, of course, as an academic, I am teaching and doing research, but I also serve on a number of committees. So I'm a member of the United Nations Committee on Development Policy, which is a part of ECOSOC. I'm also a member of the Secretary General's high-level panel on access to medicines. I also served on the Lancet University of Oslo's Commission on Global Governance for Health, and I also am on the board of many NGOs. Well, I should start by explaining why I undertook this research. As I mentioned, I had worked for many years in development cooperation, particularly in the area of aid coordination. In UNDP, at one time, I was in the Bureau for Africa, and I was the principal economist, and then I was a division chief in charge of West Africa. And our role was to help the country coordinate aid, that is to say, organize meetings amongst donors and help the government think about a plan that would allow donors to place their programs and projects within a coordinated framework. And so I got to know a great deal about the relationship between African recipient governments and donor countries, and the challenges that the governments felt in coordinating aid, because a government is faced with different donors. Each one has its own priorities. And like JICA, every donor says that we are demand-based. We follow the priorities of the government. But sometimes the government has a difficult time explaining its priorities. And in any case, the donor will not finance something that is not their priority. And so I got to know a lot about this problem of aid policies of different countries and aid relationship between donor and recipient. And I also got to know very well many African colleagues and friends who felt very frustrated with this donor-recipient relationship. And I think that the recipients felt always this kind of discomfort that they were having to sort of receive aid, and the donors were telling them what to do, and this kind of superior attitude of the donors. And so I knew from my first-hand experience that this was not a very effective relationship. And then at the same time, the donor countries are always saying the recipient countries must have ownership, and that this word ownership in the 1990s became like a buzzword, where you can only have aid that is effective if the recipient had ownership of the project. So I always felt that the Japanese aid was very different from the other donor aid, partly because it did not insist on conditionality, and always said, oh, you know, we respect the recipients, and so forth. And I think I noticed that the Japanese aid was very different from Western aid. And then later on, that was in the 1990s, I would say 80s, 1980s perhaps. But fast forward to 2000, and since 2000, there has been this rise of Southern aid from China, Brazil, India, these countries. And I found that this aid was mysterious for the Western donors because it was very different. The Western donors were very critical, but then the Western donors are also very threatened by the competition from this Southern aid. And the more I began to read about South-South cooperation, the more I realized that there was much similarity between South-South cooperation and Japanese aid. And it was the philosophy of aid. And so I wanted to learn more about the Japanese aid philosophy and compare it with South-South cooperation and with the DAC aid. So that was the motivation of the research, and so we looked for these comparisons. And in terms of the characteristics of Japanese aid, I think that some of the similarities with Southern aid, and that also contrast with that of Western aid, is that there is this emphasis on not imposing any conditionality. Western donors think this is a kind of a moral, it's sort of an immoral lapse, because of course you should impose certain important conditions on moral grounds, like human rights, or that you should impose conditions in terms of effectiveness, like please adopt this kind of policy. But Japanese aid and also Southern aid resists doing this sort of thing. And second thing is that Japanese aid has always characterized itself as economic cooperation that could have benefits to Japan as well as to the recipient countries. And this is, once again, very much criticized by the DAC, because the DAC thinking is that aid should be only for the benefit of the recipient country, and is there entirely on sort of a charitable purpose. And I think these are some. The third thing that is different is that the logic, the justification for Japan offering assistance is that Japan has experience that is relevant and can be shared. Whereas Western aid basically says that this is the reason why it makes sense to offer aid is because these Western countries have superior knowledge and technology to give. So there is this kind of sense of superiority. The real issue, though, is that of reciprocity, that in Japanese aid there is certain kind of a relationship of reciprocity, that if you give, then you get something back. And for Western aid, this is unacceptable because this is like imposing. This is not being a good citizen, like not giving, not being generous. But actually, if you think about it, it is also a way of imposing superiority. And here I draw on this anthropological theory of gift exchange, which shows that giving a gift creates a superior power of the giver. And in order to rebalance it, the recipient has to give back. This is the normal human relationship that we have. And this also goes to aid, that if you just give and you don't expect anything back, it is because you think this person that you're giving to is a charitable case, that you are just feeling sorry for them. So this is charity. Now this goes against the idea of equal partnership. So I am pointing out actually that although charitable aid seems to be very reflect high values, high ethical values, in effect it creates this superiority-inferiority relationship, which I think is very unhealthy, and also gets in the way of effective development. I'm from what I understand, I think that the interesting aspect of Japan is the country's relationship to other donors within Asia, and I think that again is I think Japan is works quite closely with Korea in terms of exchanging views about development aid, whereas Korea is yes, then they are not really part of the DAC. So Japan is closer to some of these developing countries. I think China and India and so forth. I think Japan has a closer relationship to these countries as aid donors than, let's say, United States has with Brazil or Colombia as aid donors. And I understand also that there have been a number of seminars on aid policies and things of that kind, and also that there has been some effort from countries like Korea to learn from the JICA experience. So KOICA, I think, is very much modeled on JICA. But I think that the emerging donors' practices and norms are quite different from the Japanese norms and practices, even though superficially they may have some similarities on points such as that they're based on experience as opposed to superior knowledge. And this is the reason why I think that the Japanese aid is very different from Southern aid is because South-South cooperation is motivated by this solidarity amongst countries of the global South. Whereas the history of Japanese aid is quite different. It started in post-war years as, in fact, reparation payments for the countries that were that Japan occupied during the Second World War. So the history is very, very different. But it would be very interesting to see how DAC aid also evolves from now into the future. I would say that until now, Japan has not influenced the DAC donors in terms of policy approaches. The Japan has been what I call a norm follower, not a norm maker. But I hope that our paper might help Japan contribute to debates in the DAC about evolution of aid norms in the future. I published together with two colleagues a book on one of the title Fulfilling Social and Economic Rights, published by Oxford University Press in 2015. And this book is about evaluating progress with the fulfillment of social and economic rights, and how you might develop a measurement tool for that, and what you find if you measure the progress. And of course we find that the progress has been actually quite good, but also very different, and that this is no reason either to be complacent, because there is a huge gap between the obligations of countries to fulfill social and economic rights and their current performance. And we try to explore the reasons why some countries do better than others. And the one factor which comes out as a very strong factor is gender equality. Countries with gender equality perform better on securing social and economic rights. And I'm very pleased and I'm celebrating with my co-authors, because we have been given the award for the best book in human rights scholarship by the American Political Science Association. So I feel very honored by that award.